Hello and welcome to Jiggers' place. It's Thursday afternoon, 5 p.m., and we're heading toward the end of the week. And so this is our every other week get together to talk about all those things that have nothing to do with careers, business, finance, building wealth. All that's for earlier in the week. This is our opportunity to have a cocktail and talk about the really important things in life: relationships, ideas, books, hobbies, all those kind of things. So thank you for joining me. And as billed for today, I'm going to be talking about duty. What is duty? Why is it important? To whom do we owe duty? And interestingly enough, earlier today, there was a serviceman here at my house, and we got into a conversation about that very thing. And he had some issues on his mind, and so we talked about it for a little while. So I think, especially among men, this is a very important issue, and so we're gonna tackle it today. So whenever I think of duty, I think of the Navy. First, the Royal Navy, the British Navy, and then the United States Navy, of which I was a part. And in the Navy, historically, the cocktail, I'm using the term somewhat loosely now, of choice is something called grog. So grog is a mixture of rum. Now, not the rum you may be used to, not the light rum. It's made with dark rum, which is historically the type of rum that was drunk, with water or hot water. Usually some lime was put in it, lime juice. From the mid 18th century and earlier, on wooden sailing ships, limes were kept aboard ship for the sailors and officers to consume to avoid a disease called scurvy, which came from a lack of vitamin C. And in fact, the reason that the British are called, and especially British sailors are called limeys, is because that was the citrus fruit that was most often carried on British ships in order to avoid scurvy. And then there was usually some molasses or brown sugar put into it. The recipe, if you got my email this morning, you saw the recipe I'm using, which is very simple, uses brown sugar, or you can make brown sugar syrup. But brown sugar syrup is really just hot water with brown sugar, and since the base of grog is hot water, no need really to make brown sugar syrup. And so I'm going to be using Banks Golden Age 7-year-old rum. It's a mix of Jamaican rum, which that's in honor of my friend Del from college, Guyana, Java, Trinidad, and Guatemala, Panama, and Barbados. So this is kind of a multi-cask rum, and you can see it's a dark color. I've got some lime juice here. Obviously, fresh squeeze is better, but don't have that. Here's my brown sugar, and while this is not traditional, I'm going to drop a cinnamon stick in mine. It gives it a little bit of extra flavor. So I've got my hot water here, 4 to 6 ounces. I've used 4 ounces. So first thing to do is to dissolve a teaspoon of brown sugar in the hot water. Pick this up. There we go. So I'm going to dissolve the sugar. And you might be wondering, why am I making a hot drink? In the springtime in Los Angeles, especially today was the start of a 4-day hot spell. Well, still a warm drink is nice to have. Okay, so we've got our sugar dissolved in our hot water. We're going to use half an ounce of lime juice. Yeah, there we are. going to use 2 ounces of rum. Okay, thereabouts. Again, slightly more than 2 ounces, but that's okay. Doesn't have to be exact. And we're going to stir it. Mix it together. And we don't have to worry about, like in a shaker, making sure the ice melts so the flavors blend. And like I said, I'm going to put a cinnamon stick in it, as long as I can get the jar open. Cinnamon smells so good. Okay, and here we go. Cheers. It's a nice, very light cocktail. You know, I put it in quotes because I don't think people historically think of grog as a cocktail, but I would call it the Navy cocktail, especially with the lime in it. It offsets the sweetness of the rum and is just a lovely, lovely mixture. Okay, I'll see you on the couch. So here we are, and like I said, it's Thursday. I don't know about you, but for me, it's been a pretty busy week, and it's not done yet. Tomorrow's going to be a challenging day, but at least for now, we get to sit and relax and just talk and enjoy a libation. I guess that's what I should call this. My dad would have called this a libation. My dad was a Navy man as well. So the topic for today is duty. I remember being a Boy Scout, and the Boy Scout oath or promise was, on my honor, I will do my duty to God and my country, to obey the Scout law, and blah, 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 blah. I used to know it. Wow. On my honor, I will do my duty to God and my country and to obey the Scout law, to help other people at all times, to keep myself physically strong, something or other, and morally awake. So, in any event, for me, I was raised from boyhood to do my duty. And it wasn't just in the Boy Scouts. My father, who, as I mentioned a moment ago, was also a Navy man. So he was raised in the ethos of duty. He was raised in what was originally a traditionally religious Jewish family, and we've talked about, in fact, just maybe a month ago, within the last month or two, we talked here at Jiggers Place on the idea of what are called the mitzvahs or the mitzvot, and I explained these are the ways we develop a relationship with God. And from a sort of a global perspective, it's as traditionally religious Jews, it's our duty to do the mitzvot, to create that relationship with God. Now, you might say, well, how can you have a duty to have a relationship with anyone? Well, that's the challenge, right? Especially when, talking in the context of God, we're talking about a non-corporeal being. So I want to talk about 3 aspects of duty. The first is why it's important. The second is, to whom do we owe a duty? And third,
how do we go about fulfilling that duty? So let's start with the why question. Why is duty important? And I would argue that as American society has become ever more self-focused, and this was something that began, I think, really in the 1970s when I was a teenager. America, post World War II, achieved a level of prosperity for the sort of average person that no other country in the history of the world had ever achieved. So you could go back to Rome, for example, the Roman Empire. So the average person was not prosperous in Rome. The average citizen was, okay, but the citizens were actually a relatively small group of the population under Roman control. Over the last month or so, I've read histories of China and Japan, and again, in both societies were feudal at one point, and then they were monarchical, and in both cases, it was only the elites in those societies who were materially wealthy. The average person, the peasants and such, they oftentimes didn't even own the land that they tilled. And so they were not particularly wealthy. And in Europe as well. So England, France, Germany, Spain, they were probably the closest to the United States in terms of having a prosperous middle class. But pre-World War II, they weren't their middle classes weren't better off than the middle class in the United States. And post World War II, they were nowhere near as well off because the war had so ravaged Europe. World War II had so badly ravaged Europe that their societies needed to be rebuilt. Whereas for the United States, while we participated in the war, of course, with the exception of Hawaii, the war didn't really touch the continental United. Well, yeah, didn't really touch the continental United States. There were a couple of places where, submarines shot a torpedo or something, but really there was really no danger being in continental America, and for that matter, with the exception of a couple of islands in the Aleutian chain, Kiska and I can't remember the name of the other one. Alaska wasn't really affected by World War II in terms of being in danger. So after the war ended, the United States was really the only ally left, or the only ally, I shouldn't say left, the only ally that didn't have to rebuild itself, didn't have to rebuild its housing, its industry, whereas France, England, both had been bombed and or under Nazi control. Spain was not a particularly prosperous country, even pre-World War II, certainly post-World War II, although Spain was arguably neutral. It didn't experience a great deal of prosperity during World War II. And so coming out of the war, it was not, I was in better shape than other European countries, but not by much. So the United States, and then the United States really, because we took it upon ourselves to rebuild Europe and Japan. So the material necessary to do that, a lot of it was produced in the United States, which created a great deal of incentive for industry to build up, et cetera. And then two, during World War II, people bought war bonds. There weren't a lot of consumer goods to purchase. And so people had a lot of savings pent-up savings, you might even say, and there was a strong desire among returning service members and women, both who had been in the service and who remained on the home front, to start families. And so the formation of families meant wanting houses, wanting furniture, wanting all the accoutrements, as the French say, of setting out on a life. So industry, as rapidly as it could, shifted from wartime production to consumer production. So, starting in the late 1940s, the United States built an even deeper consumer culture. And by the time the 1970s came around, when the earliest baby boomers were in their early to mid 20s, and later baby boomers like me were in their teens. So a generational shift was happening whereby we baby boomers had not lived through the hardship of World War II to have the same kind of appreciation that our parents had for the prosperity that was present post-war. They had not experienced, having gone through first the Great Depression and then World War II. And of course, even earlier generations might have gone through World War I and other hardships. So I think my generation, number one, did not have the hardship against which to balance the prosperity. That was number one. Number two, our parents, as a generation, this was not true of all baby boomers, of course, but as a generation, our parents were very focused on us fulfilling our needs, wanting us to live a better life than they did, which primarily meant not suffering the way they had suffered. And so, again, we lived relatively, and I'm talking relatively in terms of generational relatively easy, fairly carefree lives. And it allowed us to be very self-focused. And so there wasn't a whole lot to put upon us a sense of obligation or duty to anything other than ourselves and perhaps our families. And that's where I think the breakdown of a sense of duty among Americans began. And then as the generations continued beyond that, so they were even more distant. Now you might say, well, what about the Vietnam War? Well, the Vietnam War, it affected a much smaller number of people in America than World War II. Number one. And number two, because partway through the war, a lot of Americans turned actively against it. So the war experience that Vietnam veterans had was very different than the war experience that people in World War II had. Now, the people who went and fought in Vietnam often did so because they thought sincerely it was their duty to do so. But one can see the attitude toward duty changing as attitudes toward the Vietnam War changed, in that era. So as people became more self-focused, right, then having a sense of duty became archaic, essentially. So now one might say, well, we have a duty to ourselves. Well, okay, yes, but I think that's stretching the definition of duty beyond what's really intended. We have an obligation to keep ourselves healthy, those kind of things. I would define duty as that which we owe to other people, not to ourselves. So we owe it to our family, etc. Okay, we have a duty to them. With respect to ourselves, so, and this is the conversation I was having with this fellow Rich earlier today, we have an obligation to ourselves in large part so that we can fulfill our duty to others. So if we're not physically, mentally, and spiritually healthy, it's going to be very difficult for us to attend to the needs of others. Okay. So in order to fulfill our duty, we need to take care of ourselves. We need to exercise self-care. And that's why I think we need to make a distinction between duty, which is to others, and not make it duty to ourselves. That, I think, makes us too self-focused. We need to think of taking care of ourselves as just that, self-care, but not be so overly involved in ourselves that we become narcissistic. So hopefully that makes sense. I'll give that time a little bit of time to sink in. And this gets down to the root of why duty is important. Without duty, especially as I've defined it, which means obligation to others, the tendency is to become too self-focused and verge into or actually become narcissistic. And in many ways, we live in a very narcissistic society, right? A lot of what we see going on, the self-aggrandizement, especially at the expense of others, is not healthy, either for the individuals exhibiting the behavior or for our society as a whole. And so duty is important because, number one, it helps us better form our own characters. And two, because it actually gives us something of substance on which to build our self-esteem. Okay? This is another aspect of the conversation I had with Rich, is taking care of ourselves. Hopefully, it doesn't give us a huge sense of accomplishment, because it is such a fundamental thing that we need to do. Right? We can't rely on well, when we're children, we do, but once we become adults, we can't rely on other people to take care of us. Now, we may get sick, and God willing, we have a spouse and our spouse takes care of us. Or if not, we go to the doctor, we go to the hospital, the healthcare professionals take care of us. But our primary self-care impetus is the need to take care of ourselves. But we don't want to become overly self-focused in doing so. So to build our self-esteem on what we do for ourselves is to actually build a hollowed out foundation. Okay? If all we're doing is building for ourselves, think about it. When we die, everything our life was about is now dead. Whereas if we build a life based on fulfilling our duty to others, then when we die, we leave behind a legacy of memories, of hopefully appreciation, and of example that others can think about, can emulate. That is a true piece of rock on which to build self-esteem. Okay? So this is why I think it's important for us and our society to refocus on our duty and understanding our duty to others and how to fulfill it. Because in the end, it helps us build a life on a firm, strong foundation. Okay? Now, why do I say it's particularly important for men? Well, one of the reasons is because as men, we will never experience childbirth. Okay? It's biologically impossible. So the act of giving birth to a child and nurturing that child in its infancy is in many ways a duty that a woman, I'm not saying I don't mean literally she can't avoid it, but if she chooses to have children, she's now choosing to perform a duty. Okay? And it's not the same for a man. Okay? While men, of course, are necessary to the creation of a baby, uh, we're not going to nourish that baby from milk from our bodies, right? We're not going to go through the challenge of having the baby, in our womb for 10 months. We're not going to go through the pain of childbirth. So we don't have that same connection. Our connection to our children comes through something else. And so we as men need to build the ethos of duty in order to become effective husbands and fathers and good men, even if we choose not to get married and have children. So this is why duty is so important. It is the catalyst for building a solid character. And I'm not aware of anything that can be substituted for it. Okay. Now, you may be thinking of some other things. So let's move to question number 2. To whom do we owe duty? Well, as the organizing unit of society, first and foremost, we owe a duty to our families. Now, if we're not married, we still have, hopefully, I understand there are some people, they're orphans, they have no siblings. Got it? Okay. But for most of us, we have a family. We have one or two parents. We may have a sibling or two. Of course, in former times, maybe a lot more. We may have grandparents. We may even have great grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, right? As we get into extended family, we owe a duty to our family members to be there in good times, to be there in bad times, to support them certainly spiritually and emotionally, and if we can, financially. Okay. All of these are duties that we have to our family members. If there's a special event, we need to be there. If that event is God forbid, a funeral, we need to be there to offer them comfort in their mourning. Okay. Now, we may be mourning the same person, in which case we have reciprocal duties to each other to help us through our period of mourning. Okay. So first and foremost, we owe a duty to our families. Okay. Next, we owe a duty to our community, to the other people in the village, town, city with whom we live. Now, let me be clear about this. While we have a duty as citizens or residents of a community to vote, and that is a real duty, that is not enough for us to fulfill our duty to our community. And indeed, engagement in politics, I would argue, is actually a relatively small aspect of our civic duty, and perhaps not a particularly important one. Our real civic duty is to be part of a community, to be aware of the things happening in our friends and neighbors' lives, to help them out, to see to it that if something bad happens, there's some support there. Okay, you might call them our extended family. I don't think that would be a misnomer. Do we owe as deep a duty to our community as we owe to our family? No. As we go out into more larger concentric circles, the amount of time, effort, even money that we can offer in support of our community is by necessity less for most of us, okay, unless we're fabulously wealthy. Okay, but we still have that obligation to our community. Okay? That was, for example, in the Boy Scouts. This is one of the things we learned. We had to earn. When I became an Eagle Scout, two of the required merit badges were citizenship in the community and citizenship in the nation, and both of those were about training us as Boy Scouts in our duty to those respective concepts, I guess I will call them. Okay, so let's say we have a public library, and if we use the public library, we have a duty to treat the books well, to return them on time, to be respectful of the rules for using that library. That's part of our duty. If we drive, part of our duty is to follow traffic laws, to not pull into crosswalks where we could potentially hit a pedestrian, to not drive too fast down streets, especially residential streets where children might be playing or a pet might run out. Right? Our duties are actually mostly really small. They're the day-to-day things of which we need to be conscious so that we are not putting our neighbors and fellow community members in danger, and we're not taxing them in terms of creating greater anxiety because, as they walk down the street, they have to be hyper aware of whether, a car is approaching. Those kind of things. Those are our duties. Right? To be aware of other people and that their needs in the community are as important as our own. Okay, so that's the community. Next, I would say is we have a duty to our country, our nation. Okay, and many of the duties that we owe to our nation are similar to the duties that we owe to our community. Okay, so there are national laws. We need to abide by those laws. We need to pay our taxes. Okay, no matter how. If you're like me, you're very tax averse, but I have a duty to pay my taxes honestly and on time. Whether I like it or not is immaterial. That's what the rules are. That's what the law is. I have to fulfill that duty. Okay? If I don't like it, then I can advocate to change it. But until it changes, I have to fulfill my duty. Now, I think too, we have a duty to support our country. That was one of the major reasons why at the, young age of 46, I joined the United States Navy, because there were hundreds of thousands of young people in the military, in some cases being shot at and even killed. And here I was at 46, living my nice life, and I couldn't take the cognizant dissidence. And so I felt I had a duty to go serve in the United States military. Now, I recognize not everybody can and or will serve in the United States military. Okay? But there are other things that we can do to serve our country. So we can organize a cleanup project in a national park. Right? We can. I'm trying to think of something. Trying to think of other ways. I had some in my mind, and now they've all gone away. Okay, I got to have another sip of my libation. So we can participate in events to showcase our country. We can participate in an Independence Day celebration. We can recognize holidays, whether it's Washington and Lincoln's birthdays, whether it's Armed Forces Day or Thanksgiving, right? That's why I do special editions of the Way to Wow show. It's part of what I think is my civic duty at the national level to recognize these days that have been designated as national holidays. So we can take them seriously. We can put our flag out. I'm pointing over here because my flag gets mounted over on a bracket on this side of my house outside. Okay? Even such a small thing as putting out the American flag on a national holiday it's a duty we have. And if we take it seriously, again, it's something on which we can build the foundation of our character. It's showing honor and respect for our country, whether we agree with the current people in power or not, is immaterial. Our country is an entity apart from whoever is running the government, right? And it's to our country that we owe the duty, not to individual politicians or bureaucrats who run the government. We may or may not feel a duty to them. We may feel a duty to oppose them. Okay? And that's perfectly legitimate as we advocate for what we think are appropriate laws, policies, etc. But we still have a duty to honor our country and the opportunity that it gives us, even if it's not as big an opportunity as we would like. I was listening to a podcast earlier today, and it was the Honestly podcast by Barry Weiss. And she was interviewing a man, and some of you will know his name because you're big into sports. I'm not a big sports guy, but she billed the podcast as the man who made Michael Jordan who he was. Now, for me, even a non-sports guy like me, Michael Jordan loomed huge, one of the greatest athletes of my era. And so this man grew up in very poor circumstances at a time when Black Americans were routinely discriminated against, and his father died when he was a child. His mother had crippling health problems. He was raised by his grandmother, and yet because he had an opportunity to go to a Catholic school where he grew into a tall man, especially for his time, 6'4". He had an opportunity to play a lot of sports. He ended up getting a scholarship to college to play basketball at I don't remember the name of the college now, and eventually went on to become the first Black college basketball coach. And despite the hardship and the discrimination he faced, he expressed tremendous gratitude for this country because of the opportunities it afforded him. And I admire that tremendously. He had to overcome hurdles that are inconceivable to me. And yet he's grateful to live in this country and for what this country has done, has given him the opportunity to do. And so I think that's the attitude we all should have, and we have a duty to adopt that attitude and fulfill that duty as well as we can. So that's next. And then I do think we have a duty as sort of to other people and countries in the world. As we go farther out, maybe the duty isn't as strong, but I do think we have a duty to be good international citizens. That doesn't mean we need to condone terrorism. It doesn't mean we need to condone or support tyranny. Quite to the contrary. But I think, to say that all that matters is us in the United States and everyone outside doesn't matter, I think that's a shirking of our duty. We need to have a concern for the lives and well-being of people who don't live in the United States, most especially for those who live in countries where they are preyed upon by their government, where their government allows them to be abused, and where the government, because of policies, essentially keeps them impoverished and denies them opportunity. How much we have to do about that, I think that's that's a matter of conscience and interest. But I think that we do have a duty to a common humanity and sort of a common environment in which we live. Okay. And then last, but certainly not least, I think we have a duty to God. Right? There's a line you hear among traditionally religious Jews: God runs the world. Everything that happens is at God's behest, and so we have a duty to Him as a result. And that duty, I think, is one of creating a relationship with God, and that's extremely difficult to do and maybe impossible to do without some kind of religious structure. That is essentially what every religion is about. It's about creating a system that helps us have a relationship with God. Right? Now, I did another show sometime in the last, I think, couple of months where I talked about the problem with societal institutions or religious institutions. Those are real problems, and they hamper us doing our duty to God, because I think they've lost what should be their primary purpose, which is to help us fulfill our duty to God, help us build our relationship with God. They've gotten involved in too much, as we say in Yiddish, Nottischkeit. So nonetheless, religion is the truest road to having a relationship with God, especially because we have other people with whom we share that religion to help us on that path. So that's to whom we owe duty. I have to say, it's just nice. Okay. Finally, how do we fulfill our duty? Well, first and foremost, while we can sometimes fulfill our duty to strangers, largely we're going to fulfill our duty through having relationships with people to whom we owe a duty. So there are ways to fulfill our duty outside of relationships. I mentioned a couple of them: putting out our flag on a national holiday, That's one way we can fulfill our duty without having a relationship. Respecting laws, whether it's driving laws, whether it's rules about using a public library. Okay, we don't have to have a relationship with anybody to do those things. We can do them, and other people who are essentially strangers to us, they can benefit from it. And those are important because they create a certain gestalt is the word I'm coming up with, a certain atmosphere in our society of concern for other people's welfare, even if we don't know them or know them well. And that definitely has a positive crafting on our souls. But the most important duties we're going to fulfill are going to come through relationships. Okay? And these are the duties to our family. So if you're familiar with the Ten Commandments, I think the fifth commandment is in Hebrew, kivud av v'em. Honor your father and your mother. It's essentially impossible to do that without having a relationship with your parents. And then we have a duty to honor them. How exactly do we do that? That's a question that's been debated for millennia. Okay? And maybe I'll do a show on that at another time. But our siblings, our brothers and sisters, our extended family, our spouses, our children, how do we fulfill that duty? Part of it is understanding what role we have to play in the family. Another is understanding what their needs are. Right? It's difficult to say that we're fulfilling our duty toward another person when we don't know what the needs of that person are. That's why the relationship is so crucial. That's why, going back to God for a minute, religion is so crucial, because religion explains to us what God wants. And once we have a sense of what God wants, now we can fulfill our duty. But if we just decide this is what God wants, we're not fulfilling our duty. That becomes a narcissistic relationship. Oh, I've decided God wants this, so I'm going to give it to him. So imagine having a friend come to you and say, here, I'm giving you a box of peanuts, and you have a peanut allergy. Right? And the last thing in the world you want is peanuts. That's what people do sometimes. And when you think about it, that's pretty crazy. So we need to understand what other people need. And then we can understand how to fulfill our duty. Now, there are challenges to this. Sometimes people don't know what they need. Sometimes people won't tell us what they need. And so we grope around in the dark. Especially if you are a spouse or a parent or a child in the nuclear family unit. And especially for the adults and older teens in that unit. It is crucial to building a successful relationship, to helping others understand what your needs are, and for you to do your best to understand what their needs are. That is fundamental. I might go so far as to say, if someone is refusing to tell you or to explain to you what their needs are, or is withholding from you, what their needs are, or you are refusing to make efforts to understand their needs, there is no relationship there. And if you think there is, you're kidding yourself. So this is what we need to do. We need to be looking for opportunities to fulfill our duty. Okay? In my daily to-do list, one of the things on my list is to do a good turn daily. That's the Boy Scout slogan, do a good turn daily. That's part of my duty to my community. That's something the Boy Scouts taught me. I put it in my to-do list so that I've now I've habituated it. But before I put it in my to-do list, I would oftentimes forget. Now I have this reminder because I need to check it off. And so, for example, when I go out exercising, when I do my walking, I look for opportunities to help people. I remember one time, this is now several weeks ago, I was walking down Wilshire Boulevard in Beverly Hills, and I hadn't I hadn't done my good deed for the day. And I was looking for something I could do. And as I'm walking down the street, a woman is walking toward me, and she as she comes toward me, she says, pardon me. And I walk with, they're not earphones in my ears, but I walk with, they're called aftershocks. They sit in front of my ears. And I stopped and I kind of took it off so I could hear her better. And she asked me to direct her to, I think it was the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. I'm like, oh, thank you. I can do my good deed, right? I was so happy that the opportunity, came to me, because that's a duty I take very seriously. And it's also because I have that duty in my mind. It's also in my mind when I drive, so I can be a more more respectful driver. Okay. I do my best to keep it uppermost in my mind, especially when I'm out and about among other people, so that I can remember that I'm part of a community. So these are the kind of things that we can do to fulfill our duty. And I want to leave you with this, something I mentioned a while ago now. Most of fulfilling duty are little things. Doing dozens of little things to fulfill your duty is far, far better than doing one seemingly large thing. Because most of our lives happens in those minor interactions between family members, between neighbors, between strangers. So I'll leave you with that. So thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed some grog with me. And the cinnamon made it just, I'm sorry for this, all the sailors who couldn't have cinnamon in their grog. This is my last show for this week. So next week at 10 a.m. on Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, Trust and Estates Weekly. My guest is going to be Andrew Nutbrown. He's an international estate planning attorney, and he's going to talk about cross-border estate matters. On Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, Business Lessons from the Military. On Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, People Making Money. And then we'll be back in 2 weeks for the next edition of Jiggers' Place. So I wish you a wonderful rest of the afternoon or evening, depending on where you are, and a restorative weekend. And signing off as I always do, Marie Darley. You afforded me the opportunity to do my duty, and there was a lot of mutual love created as a result. And that's why you are and forever will be my belle. Courage at all times, my friends.